As a product manager, you're always told that data is your superpower, right? But what happens when that superpower is buried under a mountain of just complete chaos? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the playbook for turning that messy, unreliable data into clear, measurable product impact.
This feeling right here, this is what kicked off this entire explainer. It's from a real product manager, stuck, staring at dashboards, trying to answer what should be simple questions from leadership, and just coming up empty. It's that sinking feeling when you realize you don't just have a visibility problem, you have a data integrity problem. And honestly, it's paralyzing.
So let's get one thing straight. It is so easy to blame the tools. Amplitude, Mixpanel, whatever you're using. But the truth is, these are incredibly powerful platforms. The problem isn't the tool, it's the quality of the data we're feeding into it.
And this right here is what that chaos actually looks like in the real world. You see the same person showing up under 3 different user IDs. You're looking at your onboarding funnel and you see this massive drop-off, only to find out the event for a critical step just wasn't even firing for a third of your users. I mean, how can you trust anything at that point? The short answer is, you can't.
It all boils down to this one fundamental, inescapable law of analytics. If the data you're collecting is flawed, or inconsistent, or just plain wrong, then any analysis, any chart, any decision you make based on it is also going to be flawed. It really is that simple.
So how do we fix this? How do we fight back against the chaos? We need a blueprint. And that brings us to the single most important document for data sanity, the Event Tracking Plan. This is where we start building our foundation of trust from the ground up.
Look, an event tracking plan is so much more than just a list of events you throw over the wall to engineering. It's a strategic document. It gets everyone, product, marketing, development, on the exact same page about what user actions actually matter to the business and how we're going to measure them consistently. And this comparison shows you exactly why a plan is so critical today. See, a lot of modern apps use these flexible NoSQL databases for event tracking because you can throw pretty much any data at them. But that flexibility, it's a total double-edged sword. Without a rigid structure forcing you to be organized, your tracking plan becomes the only thing standing between you and an unstructured, unusable mess.
Creating your plan follows a really clear, logical path. You start with the big picture. What are the business questions we're actually trying to answer? Then you work backwards to figure out the specific user actions, the events, that will give you those answers. A consistent naming convention is absolutely non-negotiable, and of course, it all has to be documented and tested like crazy.
Okay, let's make this real. The event itself is purchase completed. Simple enough, right? But the real analytical magic, the power, comes from the properties. The price, the item name, the user's subscription tier. This is the context that lets you finally slice and dice your data to understand who is doing what and maybe even start to figure out why.
Okay, so you did the hard work. You have clean, trustworthy data flowing in. Awesome. Now what? Well, now it's time to actually put it to use. Let's dive into the next phase, moving from just having vague ideas to framing strategic, testable bets about your product.
A product hypothesis is really the heart of data-driven development. It's how we take an assumption, something we think is true about our users, and we turn it into this precise statement that we can actually go out and prove or disprove with our brand new, reliable data.
And you can just see the night and day difference here. An idea is just a thought. Redesign our website? Sure, that's a starting point. But a hypothesis? It's specific. It defines the change, the expected outcome, and the exact metric you'll use to measure success. It has accountability baked right in.
The if, then, because framework is your absolute best friend here. It forces you to be crystal clear. If we make this specific change, then we expect this measurable outcome to happen because we believe this thing about our users. It's such a simple structure, but it makes sure your bets are always well thought out.
Now, to add a layer of statistical rigor, you frame your test with 2 competing ideas. The alternative hypothesis is what you hope to prove true. But the null hypothesis, that's the default assumption that your change will have no effect at all. Your real goal is to gather enough evidence to confidently reject the null hypothesis. That is how you truly prove your point.
All right, we're ready to test our hypothesis. But here's the thing. Not every test has the same goal. Sometimes you're swinging for the fences, looking for a big win. But other times, good enough is actually exactly what you need.
So the classic A/B test is a superiority test.
Is version B definitively better than version A? But non-inferiority testing asks a totally different question. It asks, is version B at least as good as A within an acceptable margin? This is an absolute game changer for certain kinds of product work.
And the key to this whole thing is the non-inferiority margin. This is a strategic trade-off that you define before you even start. You're basically saying, hey, we are willing to accept, say, a 1% drop in conversions if it means we get to cut our infrastructure costs in half. It's a calculated business decision, not a shot in the dark.
But check this out. This kind of testing has a cost. It turns out that proving something isn't worse actually requires more statistical precision, which means you often need a larger sample size, more users, than you would for a standard A/B test. It's a really crucial planning consideration you just can't ignore.
So when would you actually use this? Well, think about all that necessary work that doesn't have a direct growth goal. Refactoring old code, migrating to a new system to save money, or making a big accessibility update. For all of these, your goal isn't to boost the metric. It's to simply make the change without hurting your key metrics.
And this brings us to the final, and maybe the most important piece of the whole puzzle. None of this work happens in a vacuum. We have to connect all of it, the data governance, the hypothesis testing, directly to the financial health of the business.
This right here is the ultimate metric that leadership really cares about. Your customer lifetime value, or LTV, needs to be way higher than your customer acquisition cost, or CAC. A healthy business is aiming for at least a 3-to-1 ratio. Every single experiment we run to improve retention or conversion is ultimately about improving this fundamental business equation.
So I'll leave you with this question. After walking through this entire playbook, from cleaning up the mess to testing smart hypotheses and tying it all back to business impact, I want you to take a hard look at your own process. Is your data truly a strategic asset that drives decisions, or is it just creating noise? Now, you have the blueprint to make damn sure it's the former.